There comes a point where you stop believing your own promises. You say you'll change, you say you'll push harder, you say this time will be different, but when the moment comes, something inside you pulls back. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to keep you exactly where you are. You don't notice it at first. It feels like hesitation, like waiting for the right mood, the right energy, the right time. But if you're honest, that moment never really arrives. Days pass, then weeks, then months, and the version of you that was supposed to emerge never does. It's not that you don't want it badly enough. It's not that you lack potential. It's that your mind has been trained quietly, repeatedly, to respond a certain way when things get difficult. To slow down, to question, to retreat just enough to stay comfortable. And that pattern is stronger than motivation, stronger than excitement, stronger than the temporary surge you feel after hearing something powerful, because motivation fades, but conditioning stays. Conditioning controls how you act when the feeling disappears. So the real question isn't how to feel more inspired, it's how to change what happens when you don't feel inspired at all. Because that is the moment that defines everything. The moment where most people stop and a few keep going. There is a way to take control of that moment. Not by forcing yourself with sheer willpower, but by reshaping the thoughts that run through your mind before you even act. Thoughts that, when repeated enough, begin to replace hesitation with certainty, because repetition is not just a habit, it's a force. Whatever you expose your mind to over and over again begins to feel normal, then familiar, then true. And once something feels true, your actions start aligning with it automatically. Right now, most people are repeating the wrong things. Quiet doubts, limiting beliefs, subtle fears that sound reasonable but hold them back. They don't even realize they're reinforcing these patterns every single day. But imagine reversing that. Imagine feeding your mind words that demand action, that eliminate excuses, that push you forward even when everything inside you wants to stop. Words that don't comfort you, but challenge you. At first, it feels unnatural, almost uncomfortable. Your mind resists it, questions it, tries to reject it. That's because you're interrupting a pattern that has been running for years. And anything that disrupts that pattern will feel wrong at the beginning, but if you stay with it, something begins to shift. Slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed. The hesitation starts to fade. The internal resistance weakens. And you begin to act faster before doubt has time to take over. This is where transformation actually begins. Not in big dramatic moments, but in small, repeated decisions where you choose to move instead of pause, to act instead of overthink, to push instead of retreat. And the more you repeat it, the stronger it becomes. Your mind begins to expect action. It begins to default to movement instead of delay. And once that happens, discipline no longer feels forced, it feels natural. You start to notice it in everything. The way you approach your work, the way you handle pressure, the way you respond when things don't go your way. Instead of breaking, you adapt. Instead of stopping, you continue. That's when you begin to feel something different. Not excitement, not motivation, but certainty. A quiet confidence that doesn't depend on how you feel in the moment. A sense that you will keep going, no matter what. And that's what makes someone unstoppable. Not perfection, not constant energy, but the ability to move forward even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient, even when it feels easier to stop. But it all comes back to one thing: what you allow your mind to hear, again and again. Because those repeated thoughts become your reality. They shape how you see yourself and how you act in the moments that matter most. What you're about to hear is not meant to be listened to once and forgotten. It's meant to be repeated, absorbed, driven into your thinking until it becomes automatic, until it replaces the patterns that have been holding you back. Repeat it when you feel tired. Repeat it when you feel doubt creeping in. Repeat it when you feel like stopping, especially then, because those are the moments where your old patterns are strongest and where change matters most. Stay with it long enough, and something will harden inside you, not in a negative way, but in a powerful one. A resilience, a refusal to break, a mindset that doesn't collapse under pressure but pushes through it. And once that happens, everything changes. You stop waiting. You stop hesitating. You stop negotiating with yourself. You simply move. And in that movement, you begin to build a version of yourself that cannot be easily stopped. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become stronger. And when that shift is complete, you won't need motivation anymore. You will have something far more powerful. You will have control. There comes a point in a man's life when he begins to recognize something he has long ignored, not because it was hidden, but because it was subtle. It does not appear as failure. It does not arrive with noise. It reveals itself quietly, in the moments where action was intended, yet not taken. If I were to begin again, I would not look first at what I have failed to do, but at what I have repeatedly allowed to happen. For a man does not lose control in a single act. He yields it gradually, through small moments where he chooses not to follow through on what he has already decided. There is a pattern that governs these moments. A man sets an intention. He declares that he will act, that he will move, that he will change, and in that moment, he believes it. Yet when the time comes to act, something intervenes. Not forcefully, not dramatically, but quietly. A pause, a delay, a slight retreat. If I were beginning again, I would observe this pause carefully, for it is not accidental, it is conditioned. It has been repeated, strengthened, and accepted until it feels natural. There is a misunderstanding that must be corrected. A man believes that he lacks discipline, that he lacks strength, that he lacks the necessary drive. Yet this is rarely the case. What he lacks is not ability, it is alignment between what he decides and what he does. If I were beginning again, I would not attempt to increase my desire. I would examine my response. For desire, when not followed by action, weakens over time, and what weakens eventually disappears. There is also the formation of broken trust within oneself. Each time a man says he will act and does not, he sends a message not outward but inward. He teaches himself that his word carries no weight, that his decision is temporary, that his intention may be ignored. This teaching does not occur once, it is repeated, and what is repeated becomes belief. If I were beginning again, I would guard this internal trust above all else, for without it, no external progress can be sustained. There is also the speed at which this pattern occurs. It happens quickly. The moment appears. The decision has already been made. Yet before action is taken, thought intervenes. It suggests delay. It offers justification. It presents comfort as reason. And because this thought is familiar, it is accepted. If I were beginning again, I would interrupt this process at its earliest point. Not by thinking more, but by acting sooner. There are many who live within this pattern without recognizing it. They speak of what they will do. They plan. They intend. Yet their actions do not follow consistently. And over time, they begin to see themselves as inconsistent, not because they are incapable, but because they have repeated inconsistency. If I were beginning again, I would not allow this identity to form. I would replace it through action. There is also a visible difference between men who follow through and those who do not. The first appears certain. He does not speak excessively of what he will do. He acts. And in acting, he builds a reputation not only with others, but with himself. The second speaks often, yet acts less. He appears uncertain, not because he lacks ideas, but because his actions do not confirm them. If I were beginning again, I would become the first man, not through force, but through repetition of action. There is also the example of men who have demonstrated this principle clearly. Thomas Edison did not rely upon intention alone. He acted repeatedly. He followed through. And in doing so, he built not only results, but self-trust. His confidence did not come from thought. It came from repeated action, aligned with decision. If I were beginning again, I would follow this pattern. There is also the compounding effect of small decisions. A single moment of delay may appear insignificant, yet when repeated, it forms a pattern, and that pattern shapes identity. Over time, the man becomes what he has repeatedly done. If I were beginning again, I would treat each moment as significant, not because it is large, but because it is repeated. There is also the transformation that occurs when this pattern is reversed. A man decides and acts. He does this once, then again. At first, it requires effort. He must overcome hesitation. He must interrupt habit. Yet with repetition, something begins to change. Action becomes easier. Hesitation weakens. And in time, the pause that once existed disappears. If I were beginning again, I would continue until this transformation is complete. There is also the rebuilding of internal trust. Each time a man follows through, he strengthens his belief in himself. He begins to expect action. He no longer questions whether he will proceed. He knows. And in this knowing, confidence is formed. If I were beginning again, I would build this confidence deliberately. There is also the perception of others. A man who acts consistently is seen differently. He is viewed as reliable, as certain, as capable. Others trust his word because it is confirmed through action. And in this, opportunities begin to appear. If I were beginning again, I would not seek this perception, but I would understand that it follows naturally. There is also a final realization that must be understood clearly. A man does not become unstoppable through a single act of strength. He becomes unstoppable through the repeated alignment of decision and action. When what he says and what he does are no longer separate, he gains control. If I were to express this as instruction, I would say, do what you decide, immediately and without delay. Let this be fixed firmly within. I follow through. I act when I decide. I do not retreat. Repeat this, not as encouragement, but as command. For the mind, when trained to act upon decision, no longer hesitates. And when hesitation is removed, action becomes continuous. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, I would begin here. I would restore my word to myself. I would act when I decide. I would remove the pause that has held me back. And in doing so, I would begin to build not only progress, but control, until the man I become is no longer one who intends, but one who acts consistently, without interruption, and without returning to the pattern that once kept me still. Having seen that broken promises are not failure, but repeated pattern, the next principle, if I were to begin again, is to understand what truly governs a man when intention is no longer strong. For many men act with certainty when they feel inspired, when energy is high, when the mind is clear. Yet this condition does not remain. Feeling fades, and when it fades, something else takes its place. That something is conditioning. If I were beginning again, I would not depend upon how I feel. I would examine what I have trained myself to do when feeling is absent. For this is the moment that determines outcome, not when a man is strong, but when he is no longer supported by emotion. There is a misunderstanding that must be corrected. A man believes he must become more motivated, more inspired, more driven. Yet motivation is temporary. It rises, it falls, it disappears. And when it disappears, the man returns to what he has practiced most often. If I were beginning again, I would not pursue greater feeling. I would build stronger conditioning. There is a pattern that governs behavior when effort becomes difficult. The mind suggests pause. It suggests delay. It offers reasons that appear logical, reasonable, even necessary. And because these suggestions have been accepted before, they are accepted again, not consciously, but automatically. If I were beginning again, I would recognize this moment as decisive. For it is here that conditioning reveals itself, not in comfort, but in resistance. There are many who act when it is easy. They begin with enthusiasm. They proceed with energy. Yet when resistance appears, they slow. They hesitate. They withdraw. And in doing so, they reinforce the very pattern they wish to escape. If I were beginning again, I would not measure my strength by how I act when I feel capable. I would measure it by how I act when I do not. There is also the formation of this conditioning through repetition. A man delays once, then again, and each time the delay becomes easier, more natural, more expected, until eventually It no longer feels like a choice, it feels like response. If I were beginning again, I would interrupt this repetition early. For what is repeated becomes automatic, and what is automatic governs behavior without question. There is also the contrast of another man, one who acts when he does not feel prepared, who proceeds when resistance appears, who continues when effort becomes uncomfortable. This man is not without difficulty. He experiences the same resistance. Yet he responds differently. And in responding differently, he builds a different condition. If I were beginning again, I would become this man, not by waiting for strength, but by acting before strength appears. There is also the example of men who have demonstrated this principle clearly. Henry Ford did not build his success through moments of inspiration alone. He continued when problems appeared, when uncertainty existed, when effort was required beyond comfort. His actions were not dependent upon feeling, they were guided by direction. If I were beginning again, I would follow this example. There is also the importance of understanding that conditioning replaces decision. A man who has trained himself to act does not need to decide each time. He does not ask whether he will proceed, he proceeds. Not because he forces himself, but because he has repeated the action until it becomes natural. If I were beginning again, I would build this condition deliberately. There is also the danger of relying upon temporary energy. A man may hear something powerful. He may feel a surge of determination. He may act for a time. Yet if this action is not repeated beyond the moment, it fades, and he returns to what he has always done. If I were beginning again, I would not depend upon these moments. I would use them, but I would build beyond them. There is also the role of repetition in reversing this pattern. A man must act when he does not feel inclined. He must continue when resistance appears. And he must repeat this until the resistance weakens. For resistance is not permanent, it is sustained through repetition. If I were beginning again, I would remove its support. There is also a transformation that occurs through this process. At first, the man must act with effort. He must push beyond what feels natural. Yet with repetition, something changes. The effort decreases. The hesitation fades. And the action becomes more immediate. If I were beginning again, I would continue until this stage is reached. There is also the perception of others. A man who acts regardless of condition appears steady, reliable, certain. Others do not see his internal struggle, they see his consistency. And in this, they trust him. They respect his direction. If I were beginning again, I would not seek this perception, but I would understand that it follows naturally from conditioning. There is also the compounding effect. Each time a man acts when he does not feel like it, he strengthens the new pattern. Each time he continues, he weakens the old. And over time, the new becomes dominant. If I were beginning again, I would trust this process. There is also the emergence of a different kind of confidence. Not one based upon excitement or temporary belief, but one based upon proof. A man knows he will act because he has done so repeatedly. He no longer depends upon how he feels, he depends upon what he has trained himself to do. There comes a point where you stop believing your own promises. You say you'll change, you say you'll push harder, you say this time will be different, but when the moment comes, something inside you pulls back. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to keep you exactly where you are. You don't notice it at first. It feels like hesitation, like waiting for the right mood, the right energy, the right time. But if you're honest, that moment never really arrives. Days pass, then weeks, then months, and the version of you that was supposed to emerge never does. It's not that you don't want it badly enough. It's not that you lack potential. It's that your mind has been trained quietly, repeatedly, to respond a certain way when things get difficult. To slow down, to question, to retreat just enough to stay comfortable. And that pattern is stronger than motivation, stronger than excitement, stronger than the temporary surge you feel after hearing something powerful, because motivation fades, but conditioning stays. Conditioning controls how you act when the feeling disappears. So the real question isn't how to feel more inspired, it's how to change what happens when you don't feel inspired at all. Because that is the moment that defines everything. The moment where most people stop and a few keep going. There is a way to take control of that moment, not by forcing yourself with sheer willpower, but by reshaping the thoughts that run through your mind before you even act. Thoughts that, when repeated enough, begin to replace hesitation with certainty, because repetition is not just a habit, it's a force.